Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, episode number 16. I'm your host, Kim Lapre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Now, today, I have a special guest for you guys, Tenisha Tate, who is an assistant principal at Hall Middle School in the Bay Area of California. I was initially drawn to Tenisha because of her multifaceted work with not only education, but also social work and running a nonprofit organization. My conversation with Tenisha focuses on classroom management for new teachers, including how not to give up your power by sending students to the office, common misconceptions about teaching in urban versus suburban schools, and much more. I know you're going to get so much out of this conversation, so let's dive right in. Tenisha, could you please tell me about your teaching experience and how you came to your current position?
Sure. So my story is quite interesting because I didn't take a traditional path to school leadership. I taught in a middle school, sixth grade, in Los Angeles, at urban school. And so that was back when you could teach with an emergency credential. So you taught during the day and then you went to classes at night. Mm-hmm. Typically there was team teaching. So someone would teach math and science and then you would send those kids to another teacher to teach language arts and social studies. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have enough kids to have a second teacher. So I ended up teaching all of the subjects to my kids. So that meant I taught math, science, social studies, language arts. So in what I learned during that time was that students had factors and issues that were impacting their learning. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to dig deeper into that. Like I was always thinking more macro, like large scale. How do I have an impact on larger than my particular classroom? So I went to school and got a master's degree in social work. And then again, started working in schools as a school social worker. I did that, at a large comprehensive high school in Los Angeles. And then I moved to the Bay Area and became a district social worker for a small school district, very, very small school district. And then transitioned to assistant principal in that school district. And that first year as assistant principal, my principal was split between two schools, the middle school and the elementary school. So she was actually mostly at the middle school because there were, it required her to be there. So I was at the elementary school a lot by myself. Mm-hmm. And it was you're in the fire. You gotta make it work.
Yeah.
But it was a great learning opportunity. That year, our test scores rose 82 points.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, I think that was good for me to see that, the interventions we put in place, the visibility, I was super visible on campus, and the support for teachers, and then a lot of culture building. I think culture building is so important. So did that. And then the next year transitioned to the middle school as assistant principal. Did that for a couple years. And then I took a break from traditional education and started a nonprofit organization called Tuition Equity. And the goal of Tuition Equity was to break the cycle of poverty by working with two generations simultaneously. So working with the mother and the child. So I focused on young women between 18 and 25 with kids between 0 and 5, because the research showed that the earlier you start with both the mother and the child, the better. And so our model was to do home visits with the families to support them after school or after childcare. So in those critical hours, so setting up routines around bedtime and reading, and math routines with the kids, and then also supporting the parent to find opportunities for their own education and career path. So did that for 2 years, and then came back to the traditional setting. And I've been back there now for 2 years.
So, Tanisha, what are some insights or mindsets or tips that you would give new teachers that are going to be starting this coming month?
Right. Thank you. So, first, I want to say thank you for choosing this profession. You've chosen one of the most impactful careers possible, and you're super important to the growth and development of students. Research has proven that two of the most important factors for student success are teacher capacity and student mindset and a growth mindset. So I would encourage you to seek out professional development opportunities. And while the mindset piece applies to students, I would also encourage you to have a growth mindset about your students' capacity and their abilities to perform. Lastly, remember that all behavior is communicating something. So it may be communicating that I'm bored, I'm overwhelmed, I'm sleepy, I feel unsafe, or it could possibly communicate that I feel entitled. But it's our job to try to figure out and decipher what the behavior is communicating. And that's where the relationship piece, the relationship building becomes crucial. And knowing the available resources in your building is vital.
Now, if you came into a new teacher's classroom just for a casual walkthrough or observation, and there was a student misbehaving, talking out of turn, or maybe yelling across the room to their friends, what's something that you'd like to see a new teacher doing in terms of handling that?
Sure. So I would like the teacher to go over and have a conversation with that kid, because it's really important that you communicate to the class that is unacceptable, but you don't have to do it in a way that's embarrassing to the student. So talking directly to the kids, so then it doesn't become a power struggle, is important. And saying, this is what my expectations, this is what I expect from you. This is what I expect for you to, how I expect for you to behave. But it's really important for the new teacher to stop the behavior or to communicate that behavior is unexpected. That the behavior is not acceptable, so that the class can learn. And so that instruction isn't interrupted. So, go ahead.
It can be really awkward, too, as a student to watch this go down, this interaction between the teacher and their peer. So I found that even if if they're yelling across the room, I'll keep instructing. As I walk over there, I might, kind of put my hand on their shoulder for a second and give them a look. And then usually that stops it in the moment. And then later on, as they're working, I'll whisper in their ear, we need to talk about this after class. So it doesn't create any tension or drama, because other students, when there's that tension in the room, it also can give them some anxiety.
Absolutely. I guess it's just really crucial or important for each teacher to have their method or their way, depending on their students, depending on their relationships that they have with their students, a way of diminishing the negative behaviors and reinforcing the positive behaviors in the moment, without drawing too much attention to that student.
Right. And have you had teachers who love to just sort of sidestep any kind of progressive discipline and just always send a misbehaving student to you automatically?
I would say not so much.
Okay,
not
good.
so much. Yeah, not so much. I think it's important to have those systems in place because again, you are relinquishing your power to someone else when you send them out of the room.
Right. That's
or when you send them to me. So it's important to maintain that power or And I don't mean that I don't mean power in a pejorative or a negative way. Just maintaining your space, maintaining your relationship with the kid.
Right. You've given that up.
Yes.
Right. And along those lines, in terms of classroom management issues, so at the middle school level, I feel that we have such a unique set of classroom management issues with students changing, and especially hormonally.
Yes.
And so let's take a new teacher again at the 8th grade level, which maybe it's just my own bias. I find to be the most challenging in middle school in terms of classroom management because they're in that weird, I'm almost a high schooler,
yes.
but you've trained me to make mistakes.
Yes.
So what are some of the types of behaviors that a new 8th grade teacher can expect?
It can be all over the map. I mean, everything from, I don't like my grade. And so now I'm going to tell my parent, and then my parent is going to come and talk to you. Or I don't like my grade, and so I'm going to get into a confrontation with you in front of the class. Or I don't like my grade, and I'm going to come and talk to you after class. Everything from, a discrepancy on that end to students who are vaping, in school. It's an epidemic, unfortunately. So I would say, actually, that's a good point. I would say for a new teacher at the 8th grade level to just kind of be aware of the vaping trend and what they look like, what the pods look like, just so that if you see anything that's suspicious, you can let an administrator know, or, get in contact with the families. Because the families, I think because it's so new, they're not really even up to date on what things look like. And they don't know. We weren't prepared for it. So I think we have to catch up with the kids because they're like a year ahead of us.
I didn't even know until some of my students told me that kids were vaping in the bathroom.
Yes.
And I was wondering, like, how were they sneaking that in? Because I've seen, those vapes before, and those are pretty obvious. And they said, we have these ones that look like thumb drives.
Yes.
And that just blew my mind.
Yes. Yes. So I've busted several kids for vaping.
Right. Yeah.
This school year. And, when I talk to the parents, I'll show them what the cartridges look like. They're like, oh my God, I've seen those before. Like, so parents are going into their rooms and seeing these things and not realizing what they are.
Of course.
So we try to do a lot of my principal does a weekly newsletter, home to families. And so we periodically put information about like different trends that we see so that parents are aware. So that they can get the information. And then we also have, our PTA has a parent committee that works on parent education. And so they talk with us, they talk with administration at the beginning of the year to try to map out like some of the topics that they should cover, that will help parents in our community based off of what the needs are.
And that's awesome because parents don't know. And there's no way for them to know because they're not in it. Kids with social media today, they can be extremely sneaky about that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I have found, I only taught 8th grade for 1 year, and it wasn't terrible, but I did find that the attitudes and there's a little more sarcasm and talking back. And I could see, and so I could see it going a couple of ways in terms of how a new teacher would deal with it. They would laugh it off, which I feel like almost encourages it, or they would snap back and humiliate the kid. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice for new teachers who have a group of 8th grade students who are trying to run the classroom and trying to take over and test the teacher, if you have any advice for them so that you're not getting so many kids in your office.
Right. Well, going back to what I said previously about building relationships and building classroom culture, I think, first of all, if you have a group of kids and you're trying to discipline them as a group, you're going to have more challenges because they'll feed off of each other. So I would separate that out, right? So I would talk to each of them individually, but you set the boundaries. Like you let them know, this is what I expect in this classroom. But not in a way that you're being demeaning to the kid. But more like try to make a connection. I know that kids respond to, people when they feel connected to them. And you're not going to connect to every single kid per se, or you won't have a deep connection with every single kid, but there'll be a level of respect that they will develop. So first thing is don't try to handle that as a group. Like that's a mistake number one. You can say, to the entire class, hey, this is what the expectation is, but going back and forth with a group, you're going to lose.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And especially because there's those few students who don't do anything wrong, and now they're being dragged into a group punishment.
Oh, yes.
And they're the ones that you want to really keep on your side, if anything, because they're always going to be dependable.
And you also want to encourage the positive behaviors. So, I mean, if you take a step back and you had someone come in and like just look at the number of times you say a positive reinforcement versus a negative reinforcement, like I have to think about it too myself. Like how many times am I saying to kids, stop, don't do that, get in line, versus good job, I saw what you did earlier today, thank you for being kind, right? So how many times am I saying positive things to them versus negative things? So I think you have to be intentional to call out the positive behaviors to reinforce that. Mm-hmm. So that kids are getting the feedback on what to do that's right versus what not to do.
Right. And so if a student has been smart alecky with the teacher, or they keep yelling across the room and finally they end up with you because the teacher has just had it, what do you usually find is the conversation or the source of what's happening with that student?
Well, it's typically what they're going to say is that the teacher doesn't like me, or that the teacher's picking on me, or something like that. What my conversation with them, I try to, like I said, use restorative practices. Mm-hmm. So talk about like, what were you thinking in the moment? What are you thinking now? Did your response improve or worsen the situation? How can you make it right? And so all of that is just to try to help the kid take responsibility for their actions. And then, what can you do differently in the future? Sometimes what I do is we have a restorative session between the student and the teacher. Mm-hmm. So if things have been damaged, or like I feel like, this is a situation where we don't want to continue to have this go on, like we get the teacher and the student together to talk about it. I think for new teacher, go ahead. No. I think for a new teacher it's challenging and it's hard, and I don't want to say, be in the room and you're drowning in the room and you don't want to send the kid out. I'm not saying that, but I do think that you give away some of your power when you send the kid to the administrator to handle it. So you want to walk a fine line of knowing when to do that. And if you do that, then I still would say circle back and have that restorative conversation with the kid, because you don't want to say, just like me sending my child to the father to handle the discipline. Like, right. No, you are responsible to me. Like someone else is not going to do it for me. So I think even if you have to send the kid out, follow back up with that kid.
That's a good point, because as much as, we're adults and we're supposed to be able to handle that sort of thing, misbehavior, it's still those microaggressions throughout the day from students that add up. And we may have a negative feelings about the student. And the student at the same time may feel, okay, so now I've done this in front of the class. If I apologize, I might lose face. So I'm going to keep it up because I got a great reaction out of my buddies. So it's sort of this misunderstanding where I can see if they did have a restorative circle and they could just sort of come to an understanding of, hey, the student is saying, yeah, sorry, I messed up. And the teacher saying, you know what, I'm not mad at you. Because also there's the fear with the student in terms of the teacher not liking them anymore. You know,
Right.
like they really do believe, okay, the teacher doesn't like me because I did this. And so it's hard to expect them to behave in a positive way after they feel that they've irreparably damaged that relationship with their teacher.
Yes. Yes.
So I like that idea of that restorative circle that you, or meeting that you have with the teacher and the student.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you facilitate or that you just suggest?
So in the past, I've done it. In my previous school, I've done it. But now my counselor is really good at them. So if something comes up, then I'll just refer to her and she'll follow up with the teacher and the student.
I think we forget that this type of misbehavior, you know, like I mentioned before, how much it really affects teachers, especially new teachers who might not be as resilient and they might take things really personally.
Yeah.
You know, like now, if a student misbehaves, I can just give them the look because I've learned how to establish relationships with them.
Yes.
And they don't feel like, okay, Miss Lepre doesn't like me anymore. To them, they think, oh, yeah, I messed up. Okay, I better stop it. But new teachers don't necessarily have those bag of tricks. And so that's something I think with the counselor and with you, you know, administrators helping with that so that they don't feel despair like they're not doing anything right in terms of classroom management. I know that middle school is a grade that a lot of people are afraid to teach because they think that the kids are nuts. I personally love middle school. I do too. But quite honestly, the kids are nuts, but you got to love it. You got to love how they are. Like they're so special, like in how they are developing, and just to see them grow from 6th grade to 8th grade is an amazing time. I feel like you have to be nuts with them. Yeah, exactly. You have to just kind of join in on the crazy. Yes. And when you do that, I feel like then they feel like they can relate to you. Yeah. Because you get them and they don't feel so stupid because you're being silly with them. And not every teacher has to be silly, but if you don't get frustrated by the crazy that happens and the chaos and you just sort of, you know, chuckle at it, I think then they feel safer to be themselves and less self-conscious. Yeah. It goes all, what you're saying goes again back to the relationship. Like I can't emphasize that enough. Like that's like for a new teacher, so important. So figuring out a way that works for you to build relationships with all of your kiddos. Mm-hmm. That's my recommendation. But also walking that line of not being their friend, because I've seen some teachers that try to friend everyone on Instagram, and they, you know, I love bringing in pop culture into my teaching and playing songs that they know, well, the clean versions of the songs that they know, but I don't sit there and try to, you know, like all their posts on Instagram or do you know what I mean? I think that sometimes there could be that fine line, especially in high school. I think high school it's more prevalent where you're only maybe 4 or 5 years older than your students. Yeah, yeah. And it's hard to draw that line. I think that you definitely have to maintain professional boundaries. Mm-hmm. So when I say build relationships, I'm saying appropriate relationships. Right. So I want to be very clear on that. You know, building relationships and being silly and being fun is appropriate, but when you're trying to be their friend, that's not going to be an effective way of getting them to respond, because at the end of the day, you are their teacher, right? And they so respect that. Yes, and kids, especially middle school, they want the boundaries. They want to understand. They want to be very clear on, this is what I can expect. If you're consistent with, they know that this is what I can expect when I do this, or this is what I can expect when I come into the classroom, or this is what I can expect when I misbehave, then they're prepared for it.
If you're inconsistent, then that's jarring for the kids, and that causes this equilibrium. So you don't want to do that. You want to be very consistent, so then they'll understand and know how or what to expect when they do something.
Right. They love routine and expectations.
Yes.
They thrive on that.
Yes.
For a lot of teachers, especially new teachers, they don't know how to spot a student who's at risk aside from the data that they receive from their school. And they don't even know how to look at the data necessarily to spot someone other than the list of free and reduced lunch students. So that's one thing, is they don't know what to look for, and they don't know what the signs are. And even more important, they don't know what to do if they do flag someone as maybe being at risk. Maybe they're homeless, or they live in foster care, or they're being neglected. And so I don't know if you want to talk about how they can go about finding resources for those students.
Well, I mean, when I think of that question, I think that a good system would have support set up for teachers. And unfortunately, all systems don't. So, is there a counselor on site? Because the teacher should not have to be the person gathering all of the resources and making the connections and delivering that information to the family. There should be a point person to do that. So my first thing would be, has your administration set up a point person on campus that is the person to go to? Like, when I was teaching, I didn't know who that person was.
Right.
So, and I think that may be the case for other teachers. When I got my social work degree, things became more apparent to me. I had more training and, more of the global issues that exist, the social ills that exist, and, the trauma training, and how do you recognize a student who it presents as defiance, but is actually trauma.
Right.
So it really depends on what population are you working with. Does the system provide support and care for teachers to help them deal with the population that they're serving? And hopefully the answer to that is yes. If not, then, there needs to be a conversation with the administration.
What are some of the signals that you look for, or symptoms that a new teacher, especially, because they're already overwhelmed. They're already completely overwhelmed as it is, but we don't want them to miss out, because a lot of times we're the first line of defense for these students. So what are some telltale signs, pretty obvious signs that there's something going on with this student in terms of their home life that we should be concerned about?
I would say probably withdrawal. So if you have a student that is quiet, not engaging, typically covered up all the time, let's say long sleeves and, it's hot, or they're just trying to, their physical appearance shows you that they're trying to disengage. There may be some deeper issues going on. I mean, and it could be anything from depression, self-harm that could potentially be going on, especially at the high school level. So you really want to, you don't want to jump to conclusions. So I don't want someone to assume that this young lady, she wears sweaters all the time, but there must be something going on. But I think it's important to build relationships. We know that, right? Relationships are the foundation to a good classroom, and to good instruction, actually. So if you are a new teacher, you're coming in, I would recommend that you just try to get to know every single kiddo. So at the elementary level, that's much easier because you have much more time with each kid. At the secondary level, that's a little bit more challenging because you have more students. But find some way to connect or try to connect with the kids on a personal level. People always say, learn their names. Okay, yeah, I think that's important. But I think learning something special about them is even more important.
Right. And I think I found that when I would notice something, for example, I had a student who I could tell wasn't showering or bathing at all. And I didn't say anything to them because this is middle school for where I'm teaching, and because I didn't want to call out attention to that. So I actually called her parent, and her parent had actually heard of this before, and she said that her daughter has had something where she was going to therapy for it because she didn't want to. It was something, beyond that. But I'm glad that I reached out to the parent, because sometimes that's another sign if they're not bathing, or you can tell that they're wearing the same shirt multiple days in a row.
Totally. There are multiple ways or multiple signs that a kid may be going through something at home. I would say defiance sometimes appears to be, it appears to be defiance, but there may be like some, especially at the primary level, students who have experienced domestic violence, they respond in like a more violent or more physical way when they're triggered. And, as teachers, we don't necessarily have that training to understand that, this kid is this is like it's a reaction within the brain that they're responding that way. So domestic violence, especially in the schools, in my previous schools, trauma training was really prevalent for our teachers, so that we could understand, or teachers could understand how to respond to students, and then how to build those relationships so that you can actually get to the instruction.
And then, so let's say that a teacher does sort of flag this student. What are the types of roles that different people in the school tend to play? Like, who would they look for or seek out in terms of that point person? Because they wouldn't even know who to ask.
Oh, good point. Yeah, so a couple things. I would say a counselor on site or a school social worker on site. It would be my first, your first step, talking to the counselor or talking to the school social worker. If you don't have either of those, let's say your school is small, and you don't have the resources for either of those, then I would go to the administration. So either the assistant principal or the principal, and say, these are my concerns. And hopefully there's some resource that they can connect you to. I do want to say, though, that it's important as a new teacher that you're also not, that you don't jump to conclusions about families. Like, you have to consider cultural backgrounds and cultural expectations. And the first thing I learned in social work school is that you meet your clients where they are. So I apply that to education as well. Like, you meet your students where they are. So understanding, like, what are the dynamics of the family, and not placing your expectations or your middle class values on the students that you're serving.
Right.
If their values are different from yours. So that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of us to get past our own cultural bias. And expectations. And even there are certain areas and neighborhoods near where I live and work, and just even the way that the parents address their students or their children can be a little bit jarring for some teachers, because they think that those parents are being so mean, but that's just a cultural thing. And,
right.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think, when I even think about my own parenting style, which is similar to like my style at work, but my style is like tough love. Like, especially for my son, I have a son. I have a son and a daughter, but for my son, it's like, I have to protect him. I have to make sure that he understands how to behave or how to respond in the world, because the world is not going to be nice to him.
Right.
So that's my way of loving him. If I don't do that, then I'm setting him up for failure. And so, like, that's a responsibility. So understanding that parent may be coming from a perspective of, like, if I don't do this, or if I don't discipline, and I'm not saying physically, but if I don't, like, have expectations for my kid, or then I'm not preparing him for the real world, and the real world is going to crush him.
Right. The world isn't fair to everyone.
No. And especially in certain environments, that, the world is not going to be fair to your child per se.
So let's talk about the stereotypes, because a lot of people think, I want to go work at a school in a county or in a town where, the kids tend to have more money because they're going to behave better.
Oh, okay.
So let's dispel some of those myths, because some teachers think, okay, if I go work in an urban school, I'm going to have problems all the time in terms of behavior and students with low test scores. So I want to go teach at a more affluent community where I'll have an easier time.
I don't know that to be true. There will be challenges in every environment. And students in my school, and in my affluent school, they're still kids.
Right.
So they still make mistakes. They still act out. They still behave in ways that are inappropriate. They still have challenges. So I don't think that's an accurate. I don't think thinking that if you go to an affluent school, you are, and you're right. People think that, that all kids will be at grade level, and all kids will behave well.
Right.
And it's like, no, all kids won't be at grade level, and your job is to still teach them. And there will be some challenges in your classroom, and your job is to still teach them. And my job is to help support you in doing that.
Right. And so their beliefs about urban schools being just impossible to teach at, what would you say to someone who told you that?
Well, I personally love urban schools. I mean, I'm an urban girl. Like, I grew up in an urban environment. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles in the 90s and the 80s. And so, I mean, get the context of that. So urban environments are like home to me. But I think that they're also very special because kids, when you make connections with kids, they will never forget it. Like, they'll never forget how you changed their life. And that's, when I think about that, that's why I'm in education. Like, education is what changed my life trajectory, is what helped me, advance my family's legacy further. And so I want to make sure that other kids have that opportunity as well, that they understand that education is a way for them to, go further in life and to have more opportunities and have access to more things. So, I mean, I think both environments can be rewarding. I think all environments can be rewarding in education. But they're rewarding in different ways.
Do you feel that students from a more suburban environment or a more affluent community, that maybe they take their education for granted more?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that they take it for granted more. They definitely feel entitled to it.
Ah, okay.
And so, yeah, so like they don't neglect it. They appreciate it, but they understand that this is what I'm supposed to get. Whereas in other communities, I don't necessarily feel like kids feel entitled to a quality education. They don't know that that's what they deserve and that's what they're supposed to get. I think that's incumbent upon us, as a community, as a society, to say this is the standard for education, no matter what community you live in. Like, all kids deserve access to resources and, extracurricular things and, being able to play in the band or having a safe environment to go to school in. And so you only know what you've experienced. And so for some kiddos, they only have what they've experienced. But I think growing up in certain communities, more affluent communities, you feel entitled to a lot of things. And so I will say that our kids, I don't think they take it for granted, but they definitely feel like this is what they deserve. I want to clarify something that I mentioned earlier, Kim. It's been my experience that the experience of students attending an urban school can be drastically different from the student experience at a suburban school. Sometimes those environments are different, or they're perceived to be different, and they can be different. And people may have their preference, new teachers may have their preference for one or the other. But we have to consider as adults how we're contributing to making those environments different. So do we reinforce negative stereotypes? Or even more critical, do we trigger students' behaviors? I notice in the suburban environment, students are treated more gently, they can be treated more protected or even coddled. And in the urban system, students may be treated more harshly. Consequences may be more punitive. And I'm sure there's some really smart person that can explain the social science behind it. And I have my theories, and I won't go there. I won't go into it today and how it's connected to American history. But I just think it's important, a new teacher and all educators, to be mindful and remember to ensure that all students are treated like children, because all children will make mistakes.
Right. And I think that the preconceived notions and the reality that you come in with, that's the reality that you're going to create in your classroom.
Definitely.
So regardless if it's in an urban or rural or suburban, if you already decided and prejudged these students based on location, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I completely agree with you. For first-year teachers coming into your school, what are some of the top tips that you can give them to survive that first year of school?
Good one. I would say, first of all, build relationships, build community in your classrooms, set expectations. I would say to depend or to reach out to your support, your colleagues, your teammates, your grade level, and to myself and my principal. If you need something, let us know. We do not want you to suffer without, without getting support from your peers.
Right.
The job is very difficult, and you need other people to help you through it. And so don't feel at all embarrassed to come and say, hey, I need help or support in this area. Is there anything else I would say? Have some fun, like get to know kids outside of the classroom. Like at my school, I would say, we do these lunchtime advisory challenges. So I would say come out when your kids when your advisory is playing, root them on. If you feel like you want to get in there, we do capture the flag, get in the capture the flag game.
Yeah.
So I would say come out of your classroom if you can and engage with kids outside of the classroom, so then they'll get to know you as a person as well.
The kids actually love to see us making fools of ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Especially in middle school. They love that. And that's huge with the relationship building, because if they see that you're human and you can be silly, they feel less awkward in your class as well. Right.
I think what you said is key. They see that you're human. And sometimes we don't want kids to know that we're human. I remember when I first started teaching, they said, don't smile for like 3 weeks or something. Like that was the rule.
Terrible.
And so I wouldn't recommend that for new teachers. I would say, of course, set up boundaries and set up expectations, but also allow students to see that you are a human.
Right. So, Tenisha, where can my listeners find more information about you if they want to connect with you and your school?
Absolutely. So my school's website, my school is Hall Middle School, located in Larkspur, California. You can go to the web and search me there. Also, my personal or my professional Twitter account, my handle is at ttate1. And then my school's Twitter account is at Hall Middle.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put a link to that for my listeners so they can reach out to you. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Okay, you guys, I told you that was going to be an awesome interview. So, of course, I want to chime in with my key takeaways from this conversation. First of all, when managing a disrespectful student during class, it's important to do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice the student's dignity, and it still allows you to maintain control of the situation. You also definitely don't want to handle it in front of your class and punish everyone. And I think we've heard this from multiple people, and I think it's really important to drive this point home. You don't want to blow up at the student in front of the class. You don't want to yell and lecture the class. You want to work one-on-one with that student so that you can still have a restorative conversation where they really reflect on what they did and how they reacted. And especially since students think that you don't like them anymore when you get mad at them. So you want to restore that so that there aren't future problems down the road. Also, you want to become familiar with warning signs of a student that is at risk. And by at risk, I mean they're homeless, they're suffering from neglect or extreme poverty. Now, it's not your job to find the solution, but you want to also look for a community resource point of contact on your site. It could be a counselor or administrator or someone in general who handles that type of situation. But sometimes, especially in the beginning of the school year, these students aren't immediately on anyone's radar. So if they are on your radar, it doesn't hurt to even just bring it up to the counselor and say, hey, I noticed this. Do you know anything about that? I've done that in the past. However, be aware of your own cultural bias when assessing whether or not a student is at risk. And this can be a little bit of a tough one because we don't really think about the fact that we are imposing our own bias in terms of the culture that we come from and maybe the way that they're treated at home or the way that they're addressed by their parents. As long as it's not abusive, if it's stern, then that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a warning sign. So just be careful that you're aware of the way that that culture interacts. And finally, and I loved talking about this with Tenisha, teaching in a suburban and affluent area does not guarantee an easier teaching job. And this is a misconception. I know that some teachers, they want to go work in a county or an area where everyone has mega mansions because it's going to be easier. And that's wrong. Now, all students are going to behave like kids. They're all going to be inappropriate at times. And you know what? Kids with money have problems. They're just a different type of problem as those of kids without money. Trust me, it's not necessarily an easier problem for you to deal with either. And either way, they're going to be rewarding and challenging in their own way, whether it's an urban or a suburban area. But you shouldn't necessarily make a decision on where you want to teach based on that. I think that one of the key factors for deciding on whether or not you want to work at a school is the school's overall vision, their mission statement, and just their educational philosophy. Like, what are they all about? Are they all about a certain way of grading, about a certain way of discipline and building relationships? Do they have a school within a school? I mean, these are just some things that you can think about when you're deciding on where to teach, but I wouldn't necessarily choose it based on whether or not it's in an affluent or impoverished area. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode with Tenisha. If you want to get more information, you can head over to teachersneedteachers.com/16. And before you head out, I wanted to let you know that I am so flattered and humbled by the wonderful feedback that I've received on Apple Podcasts. One particular one is from Hannah Meacham. She's from Memoirs of an Educator, and you can find her on Instagram. And she said, "Thank you, Kim, for a wonderful podcast. Even as a fifth-year teacher, I struggle with many things, and I'm always looking for new tips and tricks. Thank you for this." So, Hannah, thank you so much for that feedback. And you guys, if you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. I'm always trying to find ways to improve this podcast for you because I want it to be a valuable resource for new and beginning teachers. And so let me know what you think and how I can make this better. So thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.